Thank you, Dr. Krauser.
Let me adjust this.
Dr. Krauser and I were coordinating over the past week and a half, and he brought to my attention an error that was in the a presentation from about a year ago. Um, this presentation was the 5/30/2023 presentation, and if we go to the second slide, there will be the agenda. I also want to revisit a presentation that was nearly 3 years ago. It was the October 2021 presentation, how these two kind of relate together and how they may have created some confusion due to a misrepresentation of scope. So if we go to the next slide, this is part of that presentation from the 5/30/2023. This presentation was actually the kind of priority number 3. This was capital improvements. What we were tasked with, what Crabtree was tasked with, along with more engineering, was to establish the 10-year outlook for capital improvements. Now, many of those capital improvements included program improvements, but Crabtree was directed leading up to that meeting for East York Elementary and Indian Rock Elementary remove the program elements from those two pieces and just do the capital improvements because there were other efforts being put into play as it related to the program improvements. So, what was presented, as you see on the screen here, is a list of scope on the left hand side. And it wasn't formatted quite like this, but all the numbers are the same here. On the right hand side, you see the cost associated with that scope. The gymnasium and classroom additions were intended to be removed from that scope. And when I read through the list, I represented it as if they were included. So that price range that was presented, along with the scope there, went from 4.6 to 5.5 for architectural improvements, 1.9 and 2.1 for a range for mechanical improvements, for a total investment at the East York Elementary location of 6.5 to 7.6. And if the record was not corrected, it would be anybody reading the presentations would be led to believe that was program and capital improvements for that site. Now, similarly, if we go to the next slide, Indian Rock was represented the same way. Again, the district informed Crabtree that we should remove the gymnasium and classroom. It was updated in the numbers, but not updated in the scope. So again, that area on the left there that is in the red triangle, the gymnasium and classroom additions should have been removed. So that range represented at the 5.5 to 6.8 for the architectural improvements and 4.3 to 4.8 for the mechanical, electrical, plumbing improvements for a total of 9.3 to 11.6. That was just the capital improvements, not the program improvements. Now, if we go to the next slide, this takes us back to a presentation from nearly 3 years ago, October 2021. This is when the efforts to explore expansions at both the East York and Indian Rock locations were being explored, presented to the board, discussed, reviewed. And ultimately, this was not the path the board directed us to proceed with. But what I want to point out there is the square footage right in the middle. There's a square footage of new construction. You'll see that East York Elementary was identified as 19,500 square feet of new construction required to address the program requirements. That was gymnasium, classroom additions, other elements that the building needs to function properly. Indian Rock, since it's a smaller footprint, trying to achieve the same program, that needed 31,000 square feet of new addition. Now, if we go to the next page, if we take the cost of construction, that 19,000 square feet, 19,500 square feet at East York Elementary, multiplied by $276 a square foot, comes out to $5.4 million. That $5.4 million is nearly an entire, to prove that we're trying to explain this correctly, that 5.4 is nearly the entire budget that was allocated to architectural improvements. So obviously, the presentation from last year at about this time was missing that piece. You know, we're not just making this up. So if we take that 5.4 million, you add it to the capital improvements to create a total project cost, that gets to 13.1 million. Now the 2021 estimate had it at 17.3 million. The difference there is explained because that 13.1 does not include soft costs, construction or non-construction related soft costs. And just so everybody's on the same page, what soft costs are, they are testing, inspections, permitting fees, commissioning, professional services, geotechnical, asbestos testing, traffic studies, construction contingencies, and other soft costs. So that's something that is not part of the building but has to be realized as part of the project. So if you were to take that number and you were escalate it to 2024, what we presented at that community meeting is that the escalated cost of construction for that building with its program and capital improvements would come out to be 19.8 million. So the next slide, if we do that same exercise for Indian Rock Elementary, 31,500 square feet, at $276 a square feet comes out to $8.7 million. Again, the sum of scope, if we add those together with the capital improvements, comes out to 20.4 million. Now, the estimate back in 2021 was 20.7 million. That 20.4 though also does not include the soft costs, as I explained in the last slide. The escalation that we presented at the community meeting, if we were to take those 2021 numbers and bring it up to today's escalated cost, comes out to 23.7 million. If we go to the next slide, this is actually a slide that was presented at the community meeting. It shows the options for East York and Indian Rock as they were presented back in 2021. Again, this is the escalation. You see the backup for the escalation costs in the lower right-hand corner there. And that's how we got to that 43.5 million from that 2021 estimate. And the proposed consolidated the proposed consolidated project, new construction at East York, currently the budget is at 43.56 million. So very similar in cost. Questions? Okay, here are no questions. I'm going to proceed through the updates that we typically provide for the East York Elementary project and the high school project. As far as the last 4 weeks, for the intermediate school, we had department meetings. These are the meetings where we go through large scale plans. We meet with educators, and I'll go into a little more depth on those and what was covered. We had an administrative meeting on 4/15. That was to go over results from the educator meetings, talk about some adjustments we were making to the plan, accept those into modification, then meet with the educators again. And then we had a design update with Fidavia to cover civil, both in the civil schedule, the approval schedule process, and some of the higher workings, as far as their plan to address township anticipated comments. The high school meetings, we did have a meeting regarding some of the testing and inspection that was happening on the high school structure. We had that meeting on 4/15. That was with the administration, and we are currently on hold with that. We're awaiting approval of the petrographic testing. We did have the concrete cores extracted. They were sent out to Minnesota to the testing agency, and if that supplemental service gets approved, that testing agency will perform that work. That work consists of chlorinization testing for the concrete and carbonization of the steel rebar to see the structural stability of that shell. As far as the next 4 weeks, we will continue to have department meetings. We don't need to meet with the whole group again. We had a lot of really good input, but we do particularly have the Music, Art, STEM, and Media Center as follow-up conversations. And we'll be hopefully getting the results of that petrographic testing so we can have further conversations about the high school and auditorium. We will also, as normal, have design development meetings, continuing engineering coordination meetings, and then for our next meeting, in the presentation I give, we'll be able to have a design development cost update for East York Elementary specifically. Next slide. All right, so the department meetings. We had 21 department meetings. All educational departments were met with for the intermediate school level, as well as information technology and facilities, where we covered mechanical, electrical, and plumbing needs for the building. We met with approximately 50 to 60 educators throughout these meetings. And I'm not going to go through the whole list, but that list of departments up there, that's the full list of everybody that we met with. We met with them at least 2 times since our last meeting, and some of those departments we met with 3 times. And again, as I mentioned earlier, we're going to be following up with at least 4 of the departments with design updates to receive their input. If we go to the next slide. This is an example. These are traditional tools that we use for conveying construction and design. You got floor plans there on the one side. This is a typical classroom at the intermediate school. And on the right-hand side, you'll see elevations of the interior of the rooms and the corridor spaces. These are some of the tools we traditionally use to convey what's needed in the space. We talk about educational services, the amount of marker boards you need, the amount of displays, how you want to set up your room, what kind of flexibility you want in your room. But we don't just do it in 2D anymore. If we go to the next slide, This is an example of a static image of what we use for a three-dimensional conversation of the space. When we have the meetings, we're actually using a screen. We have the laptop with us. We're actually rotating around that space. They can see all four walls of their educational space. They can see how they would function as far as where the marker boards are, where the casework is, how much casework they need. Do they want drawers? Do they want files? Do they want cubbies for storage? All of those are parts of the conversations that we have. What is the entry sequence? Where does a book bag go? Where does the coat go? All those items were discussed. And we did make a lot of modifications from the original design based on the feedback that we got, and then came back to the same educating group and got further buy-in. Questions on the department meetings?
I would just like to say I'm so glad to see that this is happening. And in my mind, department heads, classroom teachers can't be consulted too often. I just know of too many cases where just what seemed to be so apparent to the classroom teacher, a need that a classroom teacher just seemed so apparent to them and was a surprise. Even I love administrators, but even administrators would miss out on, some of the things that the actual hands-on classroom teacher needs. So I'm hats off, way to go, keep it up. Don't worry about meeting with them too often because that last meeting is going to have a light bulb moment for somebody. And I appreciate that very much.
Thank you for realizing that. And actually, it was great. The first meeting, we had the traditional tools, the floor plans, the elevations. The second meeting, we had the three-dimensional items pulled together. And it was interesting because there's a lot more that just clicks when you see it in 3 dimensions. Okay, on to the next slide. Site plan updates as it relates to East York Elementary. We have not had major updates to the plan. This is really a further development of the plan. We've been continuing to develop. The real thing I want to point out here is that we've actually achieved the parking counts that the administrative team had kind of laid out for us. We did some modifications to the bus and the van drop-off loop, as you can see on the right-hand side of the site plan there. We were able to achieve another 20 staff parking spots within that loop without increasing any impervious area. So we have 13 vans. It is 13 vans, right? Yes, 13 vans. I think it's 13 buses, and then 20 parking spots able to be achieved in that loop. It's 12 buses, 13 vans. There we go. We've been able to achieve 129 parking spots on the total site, and we have the ability to connect to the paid play area for overflow parking and events. So that should alleviate much of the overflow congestion in neighborhoods. We've been able to do this and stay under the 50% maximum lot coverage. So that means the proposed plan as it is laid out right now requires no variances in Spring-Sperry Township. We did have the traffic scoping determination come back. That's the first step in the traffic study. That was completed on 4/17, and it came back with a recommendation to do a further traffic study of, I believe it was 15 intersections around the neighborhood area. And I believe that's a supplementary service that's being talked about here.
Mr. Wentz,
Yes.
when you're talking about buses and vans, is there space for them during the drop-off area? They're all going to be able to go parallel and do all those kinds of things. I'm assuming that you've had some conversations with our coordinator of transportation as to how many. I'm guessing this then is 12 is twice what the schools had. Each one had 6 before.
Yeah.
It's kind of hard to tell.
Yeah, we got confirmations on the number of vans and the number of buses. The buses are lined on the outside. It might be hard to see on the screen here, but the buses are lined on the outside of that loop so that the door side is dropping directly onto the sidewalk. And then the vans are parked chevron style, closest to the school in the center of that parking area, whereas the additional car parking is on the far side, the more residential side of that loop.
So they're going to have to cross over the path of the buses? Is that what you're saying to me?
Some may, yes, but we do also have additional stacking around the bus loop. So if there are any that require handicap accessibility, curbside drop-off, we do have the ability to achieve that there as well in addition to the buses.
That just doesn't sound very safe.
Again,
in my mind.
If I may add, Mr. Farr, so we do have a combination, and Mr. Wentz and I have spent a lot of time talking about this. To your point, we do have some students that require a small number of students that would require an ability to access the van directly on the sidewalk, and there's space for that. the majority of our students are met one-on-one, and there's a center walkway that they're coming out to meet them. That's what happens at our current buildings right now. They come out, they meet them, they join them,
I
and then
get
they
that.
walk in regularly. Yeah,
I get that, but it just sounds, maybe it sounds worse than it is.
I think so.
Okay.
But we've been in communication with both Dr. Gully and Ms. Bedell, and I've certainly been there, and I know Mrs. Campbell, I don't know if she's here. She can certainly comment on that as well. But yeah, right now at that point, those students are able to access what they need immediately. Yeah.
And my other question, more in general, where do we stand with Springettsbury Township as far as getting all permits and keeping them happy?
Yeah, we're on track. There's actually a pre-application meeting happening tomorrow at 1, where we'll be going through the application documents with them. And I believe it is in 2 weeks. They're sending that to the township for the review.
So we're coming in on that. Have we had a lot of negative feedback from the township, or is it positive feedback, or what are
Not
their
necessarily.
engineering saying?
It's been normal conversations that we would expect on any project about, impervious area, parking count requirements, what the township's expectations are on parking versus what the school's expectations are. So it's all been normal conversations. I can't think of anything that's above and beyond.
Okay.
The only thing, the traffic study, when that scoping came back from the
Right.
traffic scoping determination, it was a little more robust than we're used to seeing. But again, we're moving forward with their request.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. The next slide, this is actually has not updated. This is going to be updated next month when we finish design development. And I'm just going to kind of move on here, since this is all the same information as previously presented, to the schedule. The next slide. The schedule here, we have actually moved out design development. I know we had hoped to finish design development this month. We've moved it out to the end of next month. We need our engineers to catch up with us. Architecturally and civil, we are substantially complete for design development, but we need our mechanical, electrical, and plumbing engineers to catch up with us and make that progress as well. So we've outlined a schedule here that has our 50% design development wrapping up in approximately 2 weeks, and our 100% design development wrapping up at the end of next month. At the end of next month, when I have the presentation, we'll have an updated cost analysis of the project, which is going to be inclusive of the mechanical, electrical, plumbing elements, which is why we didn't have that update today. I need those pieces to really create an accurate, updated budget. To continue through the process, we will be having a design review in June. We have that labeled as June 6th right there. That design review is really going to be with the district, Fidavia, the owner's rep, and the design team to kind of go through where the design progress is at this point. Oftentimes, we have the ability to walk through the building in 3 dimensions, almost like a video game. You can walk through and look in any direction you want. It's fully modeled at that point. And then as far as goals after that, we'll be aiming towards 50% construction documents mid-July, and an Act 34 hearing in August, as Dr. Krauser has stated earlier. We'll have another owner review with the owner's representative, members of the York Suburban School District staff, and the design team. That'll be in September, very early September, with completion of 100% construction documents in September 20th. Questions on the schedule?
To clarify that, I was actually going to ask you just to sort of give us a general rundown. I've had members of the public say, so what's next? What's happening? And this does help me. When you say 100% construction documents by 9/20, what is that? What does that mean? Like, what's a construction document? I mean, to the layman, I don't.
Sure. Yeah, a set of construction documents. It's basically that set of drawings that gives the contractors the set of instructions they need to build the project.
Okay.
From the site to the building to the mechanical, it's everything that they need as a set of instructions for construction. So in addition to that, we also have the specifications. The specifications are a book, and it's often multiple books. In this case, it will be multiple books that go through every single piece of information, every single piece of equipment, right down to the screws that need to be specified to be included in the project, so that everybody's bidding the same thing. So those two pieces complement each other to create what's considered the contract documents, which is a mixture of the drawings and the specifications that create the instructions. So that's the completion at the 100% construction documents. And that's what gives the set of documents that are ready to be put on the street for bids, so that contractors can all get together, bid on the same thing, know that the bids are coming back equal, and have a project feasible.
Okay, that helps me. And where in this timeline or with the documents does, to Mrs. Fryrick's question, the cooperation working with the township, where does that fall into this rough timeline? Is this after you have the documents and the township acts, or?
Yeah, so there's two different tracks to that. So there's the civil track, and then there's the building construction, architectural track to it. As far as the civil track, that coordination has already started. We've been having conversations regularly, almost weekly, with the township on varying subjects, everything from sewer modules to parking requirements to traffic requirements. Those conversations have been ongoing. As far as the architectural, we often have a sit-down meeting with the permit and code reviewing office ahead of time during the design process, and we'll be doing that at the end of design development here. And that meeting, we really kind of lay out the building, our take on the layout of the code. If we see any red flags or there's anything that we have any curiosities about, we'll bring it up at that point. I'll be totally honest, this is a very straightforward layout. We are not pushing any of the boundaries of the code, building areas, sprinkling, none of that is in question. So this should be a very straightforward review process from the building standpoint. There was one other point I wanted to hit, but it slipped my mind. I'm sorry.
That helps me. Thank you.
So you're saying actually sometime around the end of September, this could go out for bid? 9/20?
Yes, the end of September.
End of September. Come back in. How long
Yeah.
is, just curious, I can't remember. It's the number of weeks that you'll have it out there for bids, right? And all kinds
Yeah,
of
we're
pre-bid
shooting for 6
conferences.
weeks for this one. And for a new construction building, 6 weeks should be ample time.
Okay, yeah, pre-bid meetings and all that other kind of good stuff. Okay, so that comes back sometime second week in October. 6 weeks would be the end of October, maybe.
Yeah,
something.
October 31st is actually the date I have in my schedule right now.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Wentz, thanks for the presentation. I'm not sure if this is a question for you or Dr. Krauser. So with the 50% construction document of mid-July, would there be a review and approval process? Where does the board come back into play with these dates?
Yeah, there's actually 2 steps the board has to take to get to bid. The one is going to be in September 24, and that would be approval to release the documents for bid. So that's a procedural vote to say, okay, all the documents are ready to go. We want to put them on the street. We have to have the board's blessing before we do that. The other one is when the bids are received, and that's the approval of bids. And right now we have that slated for November 24. And so we'll have the bids received. There will be a meeting. I think we are targeting the planning meeting that month. I think that's on maybe the 11th, earlier in the month. And we'd be having a recommendation of alternates that we would recommend approving, and then take that to the full board vote that month.
Do you see that we might have a small number of alternates or for the project, or average? Just kind of curious, because it does affect the, what we as a board look at to decide, yay or nay.
Yeah, so for those who aren't familiar with what alternates are, we often build in alternates into a project because what we want to do is have a base project that's achievable. It's a base project that achieves all your educational goals, but then also gives you enough flexibility that if the project comes in too high, you're able to either add alternates to add to the value, or deduct alternates to reduce the value of the project, to keep those expenses at bay and still achieve your educational program. So right now we have identified a handful of alternates early in the process, and we're going to continue to develop that. Oftentimes we'll include alternates for material finishes to say, yeah, we'd love terrazzo, but would LVT be a suitable substitute? That would be a great deduct alternate or add alternate, depending on how you wanted to structure it. Another one we often see is with as it relates to security and how many security features you want around the building. What is the extent? We have recommended security features at entry and exit points, and you can extend those security features. They just come with a cost. So that's another alternate we often bake in.
I'm just curious. It's a little fun for me, having lived through this a couple of times. Are they still looking at how many shrubs we put out on this property and how many trees they want us to plant? I mean, they've been known to put down shrubs that are just in the wrong places to be, to allow our people to be able to mow in a reasonable fashion, or trees that are blocking windows in the art room and things like that. So I'm curious as to whether the township is still doing that kind of thing.
There is a buffering requirement for the site. So the houses that are adjacent to roads and elements like that, there will be a vegetated buffer there. So that's something we'll have to incorporate. But as far as shrubs close to the building, we typically don't recommend too many shrubs or trees close to the building for security purposes.
Yeah.
You want to have clear sight lines
Good deal.
from
Well,
your
some of
building
these
to the
were
site.
plunked like just in the middle of a lawn or something, and just okay. Thank you very much.
Sure. Any other questions? Yes.
Mr. Wentz, I want to make sure I understand this correctly. Right now, the figure for renovating East York and Indian Rock would come to $43.5 million.
Let me go back in my slides here.
Yeah, I apologize for being a little slow on the uptake here.
Nope, that's all right. If that is the escalated cost from the community meeting, yes, 43.5 is escalated to 2024. So that presentation we had back in 2021, obviously we know there's been a lot of escalation and cost impacts in the meantime. Mm-hmm. The point of updating that was to say, okay, that was an option that was considered back in 2021. This is what it would mean in today's dollars, and it's very similar to the proposed project that's in the hopper.
So the difference between renovating two existing buildings and a new building designed to meet the evolving needs of education, and this table is $6,000. And it would include, among the innovations, functional toilets for all of the staff and students. Is that correct?
It would be $60,000.
$60,000
once you extrapolate that, and that project for the two buildings that did include programs. So it was renovations and additions to those two buildings, equal approximately the same amount as the new construction. Yes.
Thank you very much.
Sure. Any other questions? Thank you very much for the opportunity.